السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة. Brothers and sisters, respected elders, Islam, it perceives the Quran. When we look at the Quran, we're looking at it in a medical perspective. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by its very essence, the Quran, is revealed as a cure and a mercy. This cure and this mercy has a system behind it. And that's why the Almighty, He says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ قَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَشِفَاءٌ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةٌ. That, O mankind, O humankind, indeed a revelation, a warner, a reminder has been revealed to you, for which is a cure to the sicknesses that exist in humankind. The Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam, he said, لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاءٌ علم من علمه وجهله من جهله. That for every sickness, there's a cure. For those of us that know the cure, they are able to apply that particular cure, medicine, application to the sick. And for those of us that don't know the cure, they are unable to apply accurately that medication, that intervention, that cure. Brothers and sisters, this is extremely important for us to think about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He described the Quran as a medicine. And we know very well the main medicine it's focusing on is the cure of the hearts, the sadnesses, the wickedness, the corruptions that exist between us. And that the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has shown us a systemization, a guide through this revelation in Islamic theology, they believe, that guides us in this matter. But what is interesting is that this guide has to be applied in a way that is accurately understood. And that's why Abu Umar ibn Abdul Barr rahimahullah ta'ala in the 4th century of the Islamic calendar, he said, وَلَكِنْ يَبْقَى لِهَذِي الْعِلْمِ قَوْمٌ وَإِنْ قَلُّوا يَحْفَظُونَ عَلَى الْأُمَّةِ أُصُولِهِ وَيُمَيِّزُونَ فُرُوعِهِ فَضْلًا مِنَ اللَّهِ وَنِعْمَةً وَلَا يَزَالَ النَّاسِ بِخَيْرٍ مَا بَقِيَ الْأَوَّلَ حَتَّى يَتَعَلَّمَ مِنْهُ الْآخِرَ فَإِنَّ ذَهَابَ الْعِلْمِ بِذَهَابِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. So Abu Umar ibn Abdul Barr rahimahullah ta'ala, he was an Andalusian scholar from Spain, a tremendous scholar. And actually those of us that know Islamic history, Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi rahimahullah ta'ala respected him tremendously. So Abu Umar ibn Abdul Barr rahimahullah ta'ala, he wrote this letter, and he's talking about the importance of knowledge. And knowledge here is not knowledge that we know it of 1 + 2, but comprehension. And he says, وَلَكِنْ يَبْقَى لِهَذِي الْعِلْمِ قَوْمٌ وَإِنْ قَلُّوا. There will remain specialists, specializing in this spiritual knowledge, in this cure, in this medicine, for mankind, to help mankind, وَإِنْ قَلُّوا, even if it's just a little bit, a small percentile of the population. يَحْفَظُونَ عَلَى الْأُمَّةِ أُصُولِهِ. They will continue to strive and protect the spiritual foundation of the human community, particularly in the faith of the Islamic theology. وَيُمَيِّزُونَ فُرُوعِهِ. And they will differentiate and clarify and help guide humankind in the things outside of those foundations. فَضْلًا مِنَ اللَّهِ وَنِعْمَةً. It is a blessing, it is a bounty, it is a gift from the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala to these people. وَلَا يَزَالَ النَّاسِ بِخَيْرٍ. People will only continue to be good. And this is a very important point. مَا بَقِيَ الْأَوَّلِ حَتَّى يَتَعَلَّمَ مِنْهُ الْآخَرِ. As long as the predecessors beforehand have learned through the source of blessings and peace and passed it on to the generation thereafter, to the next generation thereafter. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, لا أدري, he said, I don't know what part of the population, of the community is best, the beginning or the end. Inna ummati qal matar. That my population, my people, it's like rain. La adri ayyahuma afdal. I don't know which one is better, the beginning population or the population to come thereafter. So the idea, brothers and sisters, is that there is a continuous glad tidings. That Islam, it's not for one generation. It's not for one generation. It's not for one culture. It's not for one population. It's not for one gender, among other things. But Islam will continuously have influence, positive influence, as long as people continue to adhere to that medicine, that cure, that blessing, that grace. And this grace is a form of inheritance. It is a form of a gift that a father gives to his son, that a mother gives to her daughter, that the older communities in the many written books pass on to the next generation for those to learn thereafter. And that's why we know that it is Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the righteous predecessors thereafter to recite Surah Al-Kahf on Friday. And why I think is interesting is because, Aisha, she said something very important. She came across a person in Medina, in the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and she heard a group of people reciting ahadith, Prophet ﷺ. And the way they were reciting it was sardan. They were reciting it just, and then they go next hadith, right? And unfortunately, we all know it's not quantity, it's quality. We know this and we hear that. And it's in our culture, in the West and the East. It's not quantity, it is quality. So Aisha, she heard this and she stopped them. And Aisha, we know, is one of the greatest scholars, but people don't know she's one of the greatest scholars of Islam, but also in medicine. Medicine, I'm talking about medical intervention. And they asked her once, as Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi, he said, how do you know so much, the people at her time, how do you know so much about medicine? And she said, I used to learn with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. People would come and they would talk and they would interact with the Prophet ﷺ and they talk about medical intervention, cure, health, and I learned from that. And her father, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, was also a medical scholar. So she inherited this knowledge we're talking about. But in the essence we're talking about right now is that nur. نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ امْرِئًا سَمِعَ مُقَالَتِي فَوَعَاهَا فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَهَا. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, the Almighty will give this spiritual lightening. نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ امْرِئًا سَمِعَ مُقَالَتِي, who comprehended and heard and applied the teachings of faith. They applied it in their life. فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَهَا. After learning, comprehending, studying, they then taught it to other people in a similar fashion. So the muhaddithun, they said, نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ امْرِئًا, that Allah, He gives this nur, this metaphysical blessing, this metaphysical aura, this thing about this person that can be physical, but it's very much spiritual. They are guided by this grace, this light, this nur, Allah nur samawati wal, this grace, this light. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guides them in their life. So they speak. And when they speak, they don't need to speak much, but they speak truth. And when they act, they don't need to act much, but they act in truth and grace. And when they teach others, they act and teach in grace. But what's interesting about them, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِذَا فُسِدَتِ النَّاسِ, if the people, they fall into corruption, look to these people because they are the people that bring peace. They are the people that bring peace. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu udkhulu fi silmi kaffa. And there are ta'awil for the word silm here. And we know that one of the meanings of silm is Islam, monotheism, peace and its grace, but we also know that it comes from the word salam. So peace is the essence of Islam, and that grace of the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the pathway of it is the manhaj of the Prophet ﷺ. And we know that very well from the ayat that talk about this particular aspect. That was his manhaj, alayhi salatu wassalam. So Aisha, she said this statement, and we go back to that narrative, and she sees the people, and we see it in today's climate, right? People, it's all about numbers, quantity, and not quality. How many ahadith did the person know? How many ayat have they memorized? Right? How many rik'ahs did they pray in the surah? And then you go back, how many tasbihat did you do with your hand? You know what the Prophet ﷺ, he came across his wife in Sunan Abi Dawood, and she was sitting and she was making tasbih after Fajr. And he left and he came back and she was still making tasbih. Then he told her, you know, I said a few words that if you were to compare all the words you said to what I said, it would have been more. So the attention of the heart is a different situation than the attention of the tongue. The attention of the heart in what you do, in the things you say, in the workforce that you work for, your honesty, your quality, the ayat you recite, is not going to necessarily be the quantity, it's going to be the quality. And we know the harder it is, the more the ajr it is. And that's why Prophet ﷺ, he said in Ajr ala qadr al-mashaqqa, as Aisha, she narrated, that the reward of a person is based upon the hardship, not hardship like you bring about the hardship to yourself, it's the struggle you're trying to go through to achieve these goals. So Aisha, she sees these people reciting these ahadith, the Prophet ﷺ, with so much speed. And she said, this is not the way we learned the prophetic ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not the way we used to study the prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And Umar al-Khattab, he said to people that were reciting so many ayat of the Quran and memorizing so many ayat, he said, this was not the way of the companions. This is not the manhaj of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not the way he taught us. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran about this, على مكث ونزلناه تنزيلا وقرآنا فرقناه لتقرأه على الناس على مكث ونزلناه تنزيلا. That the Quran, the Almighty, He revealed it in stages to the Prophet ﷺ in parts. على مكث ونزلناه تنزيلا, in parts, and then he would teach it and recite it in parts. In parts. Why? Is because the Prophet Muhammad is the spiritual doctor. And as Aisha, she said, if people were not prepared to discuss certain furu' because their foundation was off, they wouldn't be able to accept such things, such as leaving alcohol, which became a foundation. And this was the hikmah, this is knowledge, this is wisdom. So when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, we're talking about a medical practitioner trying to guide a person who might be in a state of sickness. But if you yourself are sick, or you yourself don't have the cure, or you yourself don't have the comprehension, you yourself don't have the grace, you yourself don't have the mercy, you yourself don't understand al-waqi', you don't understand the situation, how is it that you're going to be able to get this person the practical medical intervention that they need in order for them to become better? And this is something that's missing in a lot of situations. نزلناه تنزيلا على مكث ونزلناه تنزيلا. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي واستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على مبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم ألهمنا رشدنا ووفقنا بما تحب وترضى. أما بعد. So Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he said a poem, but actually it was Imam al-Shafi'i's poem, rahimahullah ta'ala, jami'an. And in this poem, it's a very significant poem, it's a very profound poem, it's a very strong poem. And he describes righteous people, right? Eloquent, righteous, honest, pure people. And he describes them as living in and on an ocean. Al-Amwaj, and the oceans come and they go, and it's destructive. But what they have done is they built themselves a ship. They built themselves a ship. And as these chaos happens in their life, and as chaos happens in the spiritual medical field that we're talking about, they hold on to this ship so they can navigate, they're able to navigate through these chaoses that exist. Until the Almighty brings them about the grace in their life. So as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ قَدْ جَاءَكُم مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَشِفَاءٌ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. Indeed, the revelation, it's a cure for the sadnesses, the sicknesses, the wickedness of the heart. وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ. The Quran, in its very essence, is a cure and a rahmah. مَنْ عَلِمَهُ وَجَهِلَهُ جَهِلًا لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاءٍ. It is a cure and it is a mercy for those of you that have the medical application to comprehend these things. For those of you that are sincere through that desire to cure the sickness. And for those of us that want to give it to other people, we need to go back to what Abu Umar bin Abdul Barr said. ولكن يبقى لهذا العلم قوم وإن قلوا يحفظون على الأمة أصوله ويميزون فروعه فضلا من الله ونعمة ولا يزال الناس بخير ما بقي الأول حتى يتعلم منه الآخر فإن ذهاب العلم بذهاب العلماء. That the removal of knowledge will not be the removal of texts. And we know that Prophet ﷺ, he said, that knowledge will become widespread and it'll be very available to the people. But the issue is the removal of the comprehension, the etiquette, the inclination, the sincerity, the piety, the grace, the blessing from the hearts of the people. Inna ummati kal matar. Prophet ﷺ said, but he gave us glad tidings. Right? My nation is like rain. I don't know which one is the best part of the rain. I don't know if it's the beginning part that brings about the most blessing or the later part. So there will always exist this greatness and righteousness and this piety and these medical spiritual practitioners that help and guide people. And the manhaj of the Prophet ﷺ was not immense knowledge. That I say, I know this hadith, so I'm going to say it. That's not the manhaj of the Prophet ﷺ. The manhaj of the Prophet ﷺ is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He ordered Musa to say to Pharaoh, قُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ أَوْ يَخْشَى. The manhaj of the Prophet ﷺ is to say few words in a fashion, in a way that is graceful, that is beautiful, that is wise, that is sincere, that is kind, that is guiding, that is a cure and helpfulness for this person, and not a destruction, and not an essence of transgression. And that's what Allah ordered Musa to say to Pharaoh, the worst of people. قُولَ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Say a nice, kind word to this person. لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ أَوْ يَخْشَى. It may be through this grace and kindness, he will reflect over his actions, and he will find grace and reflection and piety in turning towards the Almighty thereafter and rectify his actions. Abdullah ibn Abbas rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, لو قال لي فرعون بارك الله فيك لقلت وفيك بارك الله. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said that if Pharaoh himself came to me and he said, blessings of God be upon you, may God bless you, Pharaoh himself, I would say to him, and may the blessings of God be upon you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Kahf, we know that it's the Sunnah Prophet ﷺ recited on Fridays, based on a number of narrations. Inshallah, it's Hasan li-Ghayrihi altogether. It exemplifies it, and it was the practice of the righteous beforehand. That he talks about this great king, this honorable king, Dhul Qarnayn. And the khutbah is not to talk about who Dhul Qarnayn is. That's a situation for a different gathering, when we're sitting and talking together. There is a lesson behind the story, but there's a specific lesson where he met a people. لا يكادون يفقهون قولا. He met a people, the Almighty he described, they cannot barely comprehend a conversation. There was an intellectual barrier, there was a linguistic barrier, there was a cultural barrier between the two. But this is the point. This is the point. The hikmah, wisdom, sincerity, piety, knowledge, grace. And when you have authority to do the right thing, he worked with the people, though there was a language barrier between the two, a cultural barrier between the two, a physical essence of barrier between class and lower class, in a way that they could find grace and help through that. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, الَّذِينَ مَكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَالنَّهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَلِلَّهِ عَاقِبَةُ الْأُمُورِ. And Qatada rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, these are ar-ruwat, these are the scholars, these are al-fuqaha, those that comprehend. So Zamakhshari rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, and Imam al-Qurtubi among others, and they gave examples. They said someone has a sickness, and you go to this medical practitioner, and he says to the doctor, or she says to the doctor, I'm sick. What is the description of your sickness? And they describe the description. And then the doctor says, I have this field of medical intervention I can use from. I'm going to choose any one of these to help you, and it's going to help you. And they say, but isn't there something specific for this specific situation? And he says, well, all of it is okay, so I'm just going to give you from it randomly. So the jurists, they said, this is not an accurate way of a person that wants to do da'wah, for example. This is not an accurate way of a father trying to discipline his son. This is not an accurate way of a community member trying to help someone next to them. That is actually a form of corruption. Though you think it's okay because the resource is good, but the adat, the way you give it, what is being applied, the medicine itself will not bring about the cure, but it will bring about a greater harm. So Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, ta'ammad, he said, if you try to guide someone, give advice to someone openly in the public, then you raise your voice at them, this is not going to bring about the purpose of your advice. He said, by doing that, he said, ta'ammad binusfika bil-sirri, he said, when you want to advise someone and you want to help someone and you want to give medicine to someone, spiritual medicine to someone, Bring it at a sincere level between one another. Because لا أرضى استماعه. Because if you start to raise your voice, or if you start to say it in public, I don't find pleasure and happiness and grace in listening to you, nor will I accept your advice. And of course, his point behind it was the wisdom, the hikmah, al-baligha. فَمَا تُغْنِ النُّذُرُ. So brothers and sisters, إِذَا وُسِدَ الْأَمْرِ إِلَىٰ غَيْرِ أَهْلِهِ فَانْتَظِرِ السَّاعَةِ. Right? If people are in situations where they shouldn't be, and they're trying to represent what they shouldn't be representing, this is actually one of the signs of alamat as-sa'a, end of time theory, called eschatology. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave us so many things to be proud of. And He made our languages and our cultures and the differences among one another a sign of His subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the qira'at of the Quran, that are so many, is grace and mercy and piety and happiness and leniency. In the manhaj Prophet ﷺ and fiqh, so many, because there's grace, there's happiness, there's piety, there's leniency, and there's community. So as a father at home, if your child comes to you with a different opinion than yours, and it is not contradictory to foundations, the way you want to change that is not really the question. The question is, should you try to change that? Because the way I dress does not have to impose the way you dress. If the Prophet ﷺ talked about the awrah, that's something specific. But the food that I like, I don't have to impose it upon you, because Prophet ﷺ, he said, "An-nasu ma'adin." Humankind, they're like metals, different metals. Just look at the types of metals that exist in the world. You can't bring about a form of metal and force it upon another metal. Similarly with language, similarly with culture, similarly with piety, in discipline. So if there is a fault at home that happens, and we read, Prophet ﷺ, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ فَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ فَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ فَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. We hear that a lot, but the way we understand it is not accurate to the manhaj Prophet ﷺ. That's inaccurate. If you try to use force and it brings about even more chaos, that's not the manhaj Prophet ﷺ. But we know the manhaj Prophet ﷺ, قُولَ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرَ أَوْ يَخْشَى. Say a kind, loving, wisdom-based statement that hopefully one day, sooner or later, they're going to make their own decisions, which will be a good decision. That's the manhaj of the Prophet ﷺ. When it comes to discipline, when it comes to piety, when it comes to grace. وتوكلت في رزقي على الله خالقي وأيقنت أن الله لا شك رازقي وما يكون من رزقي فليس يفوتني ولو كان في قاع البحار العوامق سيأتي به الله العظيم بفضله ولو لم يكن من اللسان بناطقي ففي أي شيء تذهب النفس حسرة وقد قسم الرحمن رزق الخلائق. والله تعالى أعلم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين. اللهم إياك نعبد ولك نصلي ونسجد وإليك نسعى ونحفد نرجو رحمتك. اللهم إنا نستعينك ونستغفرك ونثني عليك خير ولا نكفرك. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم ملك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. أفمن يعلم أنما أنزل إليك من ربك الحق كمن هو أعمى إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب الذين يوفون بعهد الله ولا ينقضون الميثاق والذين يصلون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويخشون ربهم ويخافون سوء الحساب. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم ملك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. والذين صبروا ابتغاء وجه ربهم وأقاموا الصلاة وأنفقوا مما رزقناهم سرا وعلانية ويدرؤون بالحسنة السيئة أولئك لهم عقبى الدار جنات عدن يدخلونها ومن صلح من آبائهم وأزواجهم وذرياتهم والملائكة يدخلون عليهم من كل باب سلام عليكم بما صبرتم فنعم عقبى الدار. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.